Hi there, welcome to your Venus profile reading. We are going to dive into the different ways we can dissect your Venus, and this is going to look at astrology, but we're also going to use the gene key systems, which is a mix of astrology and human design. So let's get started. We're going to start with your beauty and fashion blueprint. Okay, so you have Venus in Sagittarius. You'll see that I'll have some celebrities up that are also Venus in Sagittarius. Venus in Sagittarius has a beauty and fashion blueprint that's very vibrant when it comes to the color palette. The most important part of the body is the hips. The hips are greatly important and need to be defined, even if they aren't. Like, even if you're not a hippie person, like with a lot of curves. But if you are, then it works in your favor. So the idea of Sagittarius is a traveler, and Venus in Sagittarius is actually exploring herself and isn't as comfortable here because Venus is in an earth sign and a air sign. So Sagittarius being a fire sign, Venus can kind of lose her temper, right? And this energy kind of embodies the fiery elements of the colors due to that kind of hothead that Venus finds herself in the fire signs. Sagittarius is a wildfire, and so Venus's beauty is very much so that case. It can't be tamed. So she's quite a stimulation. I call it a buffet stimulation. And she brings pleasure through the world through that stimulation. So the big idea about Venus and Sagittarius is that the blueprint looks like a traveler. It's either looking where you're coming from or where you're going, which means that it can almost be like a mock or stereotyped version of the neighborhood that you're from. Let's say you're from a preppy neighborhood, right? Then you might dress preppy, and it's like it's classically stereotyped that way. Or if you're from the hood, you might wear very specific things that embody the language, the style of the hood. So it's kind of like a prototype, stereotype version of itself that Venus and Sagittarius will play. Now, Sagittarius is similar to Pisces in the sense that they're both ruled by Jupiter. And when Venus gets with Jupiter, she starts to play, like role play. And so in Pisces we find the full blown role play. In Sagittarius it's like hinting to that. And that's why it's like a costume, but it's not in a lot of ways. The fashion taste really reflects the journey as well. So you can also have somebody who is more casual. Like there's a casualness to Venus and Sag where, like, if you're getting on the plane, what would you wear on the plane? A traveler's outfit. And then there is the destination outfit. So Venus and Sagittarius, if you're going to the Caribbean, then you might, wear things that make you look that way, more on the stereotype, atypical version, right? So Venus and Sagittarius kind of sticks to these ideals of what the spaces that they're occupying, what they look like. So she often will also create like vintage or actually tribal, like an old tribal vibe. And it can be of the heritage that you're from, but it doesn't have to be. So Sagittarius absolutely will embody cultures and heritage that is not their own and will make spin-offs of those things, like tattoos of, Chinese characters, right? Or the like any sort of cultural reference that's not your own, you'll see it happen across the board with Venus and Sag, okay? Her legs, her thighs, her hips, this area is what Sagittarius rules. So I even suggest all the fire signs, I suggest more fitness than any of the other placements, even though fitness and good eating is really universal, but certain signs, they need to have it. And definitely working on the legs, strengthening your legs is going to amp up your sensuality and your confidence. Jessica Rabbit of the Zodiac is what I also call Venus in Sagittarius when we look at the emphasis of the bodily curves. Now, curves start to be emphasized when we see Venus in Libra. By the time it gets to Sagittarius, it's overly developed, right? Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter. It's almost overly exaggerated. And actually, the drawings of Jessica Rabbit from my studies was actually during a Saturn in Sagittarius transit. So I found that to be very interesting. Okay. Yeah, Jessica Rabbit is an overly exaggerated version of a woman's body, and she fits right into the Sagittarius paradigms, the skeleton of what Sagittarius really is looking for. And this is sometimes not always embodied, right? It's not everybody's thing to be super curvy, but it's really a Sagittarius move to be, if that makes sense. So there are certain things, even if you not curvy, or if you are, that you would want to add to your blueprint, like thigh high shorts, high socks, like thigh socks, skater skirts, slit dresses like Jessica Rabbit, ruffled, tiered out short skirts like Jessica Rabbit's predecessor, which is a cartoon character called Red Hot Riding Hood Miss Vavoom, where she wears like these cute little like frilly skirts around her thighs. And so she's actually drawn a lot skinnier than Jessica Rabbit, but still emphasizes that part. So thigh high boots, socks, garter belts. This is all Venus and Sagittarius and works so well for this placement. So Venus in Sagittarius pushes the envelope of sensuality, and sometimes it's more wild in the sense of non-feminine, and or it's wild in overtly feminine, right? Too sexy or too, or maybe there's also an archetype of a wild woman, like somebody who's got their hair like it's not messy, but it's not perfectly done either. I see cowboy boots, denim shorts, like something about actually the West deeply embodies Sagittarius. So the aesthetic of Western movies also deeply connected to Sagittarian energy, and can have a spectrum of being like more bland in the makeup. So like girl next door, not really doing much, to all the way overt, super caked on makeup. I've seen that spectrum as well with Sagittarius. So we see the wild woman. It's not as prim and proper as we find like in Venus and Virgo, or even in Libra. Like they have a, even in Scorpio, they have a very specific thing they lock into, but Sagittarius can actually play around with it. However, I found that certain people who have strong Sagittarius, like Venus and Sun or something like that, they'll be way more like stuck to the stereotypes, versions of themselves, and they'll pretty much stay right there. So you have a lot to choose from. I call this your Venus closet, where you can actually embody a lot of different ways of exploring your Venus placement. And it's not about putting it all in one outfit, right? It's about having various ideas and picking one or two to play with at a time and seeing which ones really work for you. Okay, so that is your Venus in Sagittarius beauty and fashion blueprint. Now let's move on to Venus is your venue. So when I speak on Venus as your venue, I look at the words Venus and venue. They both look exactly alike. And Venus has a lot to do with we dress up and get ourselves ready for something, whether it's an occasion or just to go out. It's the hardest, I think, for a lot of people to just dress up just because. So let's look at yours. Now, the house placement is what I would call the venue of Venus. Okay, so your Venus being in the the eighth house is your venue. Now, I find that people who have Venus in the eighth house, they people would think that they are the more sexier types, but not always. And sometimes this can be a place where it can be difficult to find the motivation to get all dressed up, especially with your Venus being in Sagittarius in the eighth house, because it's a bit of a place where Venus has to, like the eighth house is like where we put ourselves in seclusion and in our secrecy and privacy, and Sagittarius is adventurous. So you're having these two like dichotomies come together, but ultimately the eighth house is connected to like places of like the funeral homes, basements, anything that's dark, like a dark room, burlesque spaces. I know we're getting real taboo, but that's the eighth house. It's very taboo. Strip clubs, nightclubs, excuse me, comedy clubs, anything that has to do with dark and at nighttime is definitely connected to the eighth house. Okay. So a lot of your motivational space that your Venus is occupying wants to dress up to go out at night, right? To go out. And actually there's a need for your Venus to experience herself in metamorphosis in the eighth house. So the eighth house being her arena where she like flaunts herself. Your Venus likes the kind of like before and after effect. Excuse me. So like you're in your sweats and then you get ready and then you're completely done up. Venus really likes that before and after effect in the eighth house. When we speak of venue, I see it as literal, but I also see it as metaphorical. For example, literal, a music artist could have a music video or a concert in a basement or in a nightclub, for example. That would actually be a literal interpretation of the eighth house. And I've seen these things happen with artists. But also metaphorical. Your Venus chooses to get dressed up in for the night, right? And so this could be more sexier, more taboo, more extravagant, more flashier than getting dressed up in the day, right? Let's say your Venus was in the sixth house, that would be getting dressed up for work, a totally different thing, okay? So when you're not going out, right? Are you never going to get dressed? No. But the tone, yes, you are going to still get dressed. But the tone of your Venus may always want to feel like it's a little bit like getting ready for the nightclub. So for example, if you're going to a wedding, you're going to somebody's wedding, your uniform tone of your Venus might say, choose a little bit more sexy, a little bit more in that direction, because your Venus energy and the evoking of your sensuality will feel comfortable, will feel more confident if it has a little bit more of that nighttime edge to it. You're going to a friend's party. You don't need to be, the raunchiest person in the room, but choosing something that's more sexy of a tone for you, not for everybody else, but for you, would be satisfying that eighth house venue. So I hope that makes sense for you in the metaphorical idea. So it's like it has a tone, it has a uniform to it. You naturally may do this. If you don't naturally do it, then try it on and see how it works for you. The other thing is that the eighth house being a venue, it's also like just the space where you pamper yourself well, right? So Venus in the eighth house, you do very well, and your self-care has a lot to do with psychology, understanding the psychology, the intentions behind everything that you do. Having a therapist, having a counselor, these are things that are deeply suggested if you have Venus in the eighth house as a self-care act. The eighth house is also, like I said, taboo places like the strip clubs. So maybe you want to take sexy dance classes or work or have your home like dimly lit at certain times to evoke that darkness that Venus likes to come out and play in. Anything that hints to the eighth house. Yeah, so sexual expression in any regards, any form of free sexual expression is self-care deeply for you. And also things like astrology, like anything that's, fun and mystic also works very well with Venus in the eighth house, and it satisfies you as a self-care. Also, the eighth house is connected to birth, like pregnancy, so or even children. Like the fifth house is children too, but the eighth house can be like newborns and babies. So maybe having time to or doing some sort of volunteer work, babysitting. I mean, I don't think babysitting is really self care, but something where you can be around like mothers to be. There might be something that's deeply evoking for you to be around that, like just before the baby is born or after the baby is born energy. It might really connect you to life, connect you to the idea of the rebirth process, which could be a deeply self-caring service for you, even though you're with somebody else. And self care also has a lot to do with just personal boundaries, right? So, in the eighth house, this could be about creating very strong boundaries with intimate partners, knowing that you shouldn't have sex with certain types of people or certain moods that you're in, things like that. So, Venus is your Venue really helps you to tone your Venus to that eighth house, understanding what she needs while being in the eighth house, which is kind of scary for her, for Venus, not her most comfortable place. So being able to really care for your deeper self, your hidden self, the parts of you that you may repress, you may hold down. These are the things that Venus needs a lot of care for, which is like luxury pampering to those things, but also boundaries. Like I said, the sex partner thing is a big thing, like having strong boundaries with your sex partnership. Of course, you're going to have great, wild, amazing sex, but Venus having sex in the eighth house when she isn't feeling good or like feels like she needs to, this could happen because Venus is a people pleaser in the eighth house of power. And if the partner is more dominant than you can find yourself over pleasing the partner against your own morality or over your own boundaries. So you have to really practice self-care when it comes to boundaries. And then once you have really healthy boundaries and you're with people or a person that you feel is very safe for you, then you can unleash the dragon, and have a great time. But the boundaries are really strong, again, emphasizing self-care there. So now that we've discussed the venue, Venus is your venue, which is my little philosophy on that. And you'll get more of a breakdown in the ebook that I'll provide for you, just a little page on it. But we are now going to go into the gene key position, which tells us about your Venus archetype and give you a frequency reading of your Venus, which is going to help you understand your attraction frequency from this language of the gene keys. Okay, so let's go into that. Okay, so you have Venus at 11 degrees, and in the chart of the gene keys, this comes to gene key 5, and you can confirm this by looking at the right where it says Sagittarius from 11 to 17 degrees, okay? The frequency of this gene key is the shadow of impatience into the gift of patience, into the higher frequency, what they call the city of timelessness. So, this is a reading on your Venus attraction. It helps us to understand what is the energy that you attract towards you. And, like, even if you were attracting the entire world, you would. I interpret this that you would attract this part of their conscious or psyche. Even if you had a million people in the room, it's this part of their psyche that you're attracting them through. And that's how I like to see it. Maybe not too extreme like that, but it's just to give a language to what's happening here. Okay. Okay, so the shadow of impatience. Gene Key 5 is the shadow of impatience, and the shadow level is usually where we are experiencing our lowest self-esteem. Impatience statement here is I am pessimistic about my life. And this has been a deep lesson studying the gene keys and specifically gene key 5 that I constantly come back to because impatience is a strong frequency amongst everybody, especially in the modern era where everyone gets everything so instantly that they are not comfortable with patience. And so this is a very strong Venus. It calls for you to work on your own patience first because as you do that, you become a muse to everyone else. Okay. So, pulling yourself out of the shadow is mainly about having consciousness about your own shadow, recognizing when you're impatient. The shadow is always going to show its face in places, and it's like a frequency reading. Quite often, people respond to their shadow thinking that it's like just and right. You know what I'm saying? And the shadow is a doorway, but it's not the space to stay in. So the shadow gives us the signal that this is a part of us that needs a frequency shift. But quite often people respond to their impatience, right? They're like, I need you to hurry up, or I need you to get going. So people listen to their impatience as if that is a true thing that's going to get them somewhere. And it is a true thing, but it's actually just the door. It's just a doorway. So, in consciousness of our impatience, one can ask themselves, why is it that I am impatient? Why is it that don't have enough time? Or do I have enough time and I'm still impatient? These are questions that quite often causes people to need to slow down and figure those things out in the shadow. And then the gift of patience is actually quite more than just this idea of waiting. I think people think of patience like they just have to wait. But patience is actually the consciousness coming to light. In fact, they say here that impatience is half heartedness with entropy, and patience is commitment to freshness. So, patience has a lot to do with recognizing why one is impatient and coming to this new aha. Oh, it's because I'm the one who made it so, in the sense of either I didn't give myself enough time and I have to hurry, or I have plenty of time and I am just in a hurry, like I am anxious or I am fearful or I am. And so patience is actually a fresh new way of seeing yourself in that present moment. And so, which is really interesting that the highest state, which also is considered your, what I would call your beauty profile, because we're looking at Venus at this gate, right? This gate stands alone, but we're looking at your Venus at the gate. So your Venus is transcending from low self-esteem into confidence and value into the highest state of its highest beauty profile. Okay, so timelessness would be that. And I think that that's so interesting because we think that waiting means that we have to abide by time, but there's this intangible idea of time that this gene key exposes, that sometimes think time seems to go so fast, and sometimes it feels like time is moving very slow. Quite often when we're impatient, it feels like time is moving very slow. So there's like a timelessness that happens when we are patient and we actually enjoy the time that we're in, that you actually see that time is kind of like ungraspable, right? It's not really something we can hold on to, even though we can map it with the sun. We can figure out all of those things about the hours and the minutes of the day, and yet there's also this energy or this thing that I guess I would call it, because I don't know the right word, where even though it's the same minutes in the day, it could feel like 2 minutes to one person and it could feel like 2 hours to another. So what is that? And so this energy is really interesting, being that it's connected to your beauty and your point of attraction. The idea here is to exercise your universal knowing that the universe has its own rhythm. And so when one is impatient and they recognize it, they can say to themselves, I am going to trust the universe at this moment and know that the rhythms of what is supposed to be and happen are also working in my favor, right? So you have this level of self accountability, but also trust in the universe. And there's this beautiful thing that happens in exercising your patience. I want to bring you to the animals, because the spirit animal for your gene key is the elephant. Now, you have three animals. The goose is the highest animal. It's considered your vision key. Your highest expression of self is the goose. But the vision key animals are a destination. The energy of the elephant is the one you want to study, embody, understand. Like, look up on National Geographic, find out what their lifestyles are like. Embody the ideas in the life of the elephant to understand the exercising of your patience. The reason that the elephant is your spirit animal is because the green level is what we call in the gene key the It's the space of vitality. It's where you exercise. It's what I say is the space of action. Or when we're using Venus, I call it polishing, because Venus isn't necessarily go out and get it, even though you have Venus in Sagittarius and it kind of can feel like that. Venus is more like taking a rag and polishing the dirt off. So when you polish yourself, your Venus in this gene key, you're operating as the elephant, and the elephant gets you to that the goose state in the sense of connecting to the spirit animals. You also see that the fear key is the plankton, and yes, there are certain exercises where I found that we resemble the animals, not whole, fully, and entirely, but the energy, the spirit, the frequency can very much find ourselves there. So understanding these things just connects you to this frequency even better, helping you to understand what you need to do when you find yourself in low self-esteem, basically, or when you find yourself looking at other people for blame or for the fact that they're better. Because Venus energy also has a lot to do with envy. And we can't actually achieve our highest expression of beauty if we are locked into that shadow. So these are the things that help pull you out. It brings the mirror back to you. It brings you back to looking at yourself. Okay, so Gene Key 5 and the beauty profile of timelessness. So everyone has a beauty, but quite often, like I said, we basically compare ourselves to other people. We try to get into other people's beauty. So I create this beauty profile to kind of give a sense of your unique beauty. Okay, for example, Nicki Minaj has Gene Key 11. Her highest, her highest is illumination, and so her beauty profile is bright. It's literally bright, and if you look at her aesthetic, it's actually very bright, right? So the high beauty profile from the Gene Keys translates into aesthetic. So with yours is very cool. It's the fountain of youth. It's immortality. It's agelessness. And your aesthetic, when you embody patience, right, and practice your elephant spirit animal, embodying patience, your highest level, the goose, is going to emanate this flying. Like the reason that all of the higher placements are birds, and they represent that flying, that freedom, that emanation, giving off of my beauty, because we're putting Venus here, giving off my beauty, the state of being. So in your ability to practice your patience, to recognize your impatience, to practice your patience, you are crafting and polishing your beauty aesthetic, which is agelessness, the fountain of youth. What a really cool embodiment of beauty. And it really brings you back to yourself because it's about your journey with youthfulness and agelessness, not compared to anybody else. And I think that that's important to, just emphasize because, like I said, the shadow of Venus across the board is envy. And so I really want people to see themselves instead of others, like the grass is greener idea, because it's not. It's really just you knowing your frequency. And then when you look at others, it will be a whole different ball game. You look at the beauty and the love in everyone when you're really tapped into your Venus. Okay, the archetype of your Venus is called the rhythmic. And clearly, it's the rhythmic because this is somebody who is in tune with the natural rhythms of nature. Now, you have an ability to attract other rhythmics like you, which means other people who are embodying their own youthfulness, embodying their own agelessness, who are powerfully conscious of their impatience and work that energy, and they become these beautiful beings because they are the rhythmics like you. You also will attract the shadow because we're using Venus in this gene key again to stress, and Venus is about being a model or a muse. Therefore, when you transcend your own shadow, you become a muse to other people who are struggling with the shadow, which can be everybody at some point in their lives, right? victims of pessimism, negativity, pushiness, and patience. These people are quite often in their lowest state, which means that when we're talking about Venus, we're talking about superficiality here. So they aren't as beautiful in their lowest state, especially if they really embody the shadow consistently, right? Because we all have moments where we're impatient, but certain people, they live and breathe it as if that is the true nature of life, that they need to just keep moving. And so they will not be as pleasant to look at or be around. And your Venus is a muse to that. So it's not a job, but as you emanate into your highest state, you become a model and a muse to people who live a negative life. And like I said, Venus is envy, but they won't see you as envy. You will be a healing, motivational spirit for these people. You don't really have to do anything. The biggest thing that you have to do is work on your own frequency, but knowing that there are more, people who will be struggling gives you that knowing to not respond, to not try to do too much at all, but to leave your heart open and to continuously work on yourself and be their muse. And that actually helps so many other people pull themselves out of the shadow. And some people may come towards you asking, wanting, but some people, they will just admire you from a distance and embody the message from your frequency in whatever language they need to hear it. So this is pretty deep and intense, but I love it because I think that it will help you to see how important it is that your journey be realized. Okay, so thank you so much for letting me read for you, and I wish you the best on your journey. Peace and love.